Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Romy Newman. I'm the co-founder of Fairygodboss, and I'm so happy to be joined today here by Lisa Smith-Strother, who is a good friend and ally to Fairygodboss. I'll tell you a little bit about Lisa. She's an incredible leader and practitioner in the employer brand space. She has a huge wealth of experience. She has been the global head of employer branding and diversity talent acquisition at RELX for the past 2.5 years. She has over 15 years marketing experience in the financial services industry. She had various leadership roles with increasing responsibility at American Express, NatWest Bank, and Bancorp Bank. Her marketing experience covers consumer direct marketing, ethnic marketing, and brand awareness, and she successfully transferred her marketing skill set to the HR employer brand arena over 12 years ago, where she led and delivered employer brand and candidate attraction programs at AstraZeneca and Ericsson, which is why she's such a wealth of information. She has this amazing marketing background that she brought to employer brand and was one of the first to do so. She was recently selected for the Fairygodboss list of Black women leading the way in corporate America. Yes, she was. She received her world-class employer branding certificate and placed on the Black Enterprise Top Execs in Corporate Diversity list in 2016. She's a frequent guest speaker on employer branding, recruitment marketing, social advocacy, and diversity branding at various professional and HR conferences. She's the recipient of the YMCA Adult Achiever Program and the Trailblazer Award from the National Association of Black Business and Professional Women's Club, Inc. Lisa is a member of the Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority and a graduate of Springfield College, an MBA from Temple University, and a business marketing certificate from the Kellogg School at Northwestern, which I also went to, we just established. So happy to have you here with us, Lisa. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. Really happy to be with you, Romy, and looking forward to our conversation.
Great. All right. Well, I'm going to share our slides here. So we called this presentation, this webinar, You Have Diversity Hiring Goals, but now what? You just met us. So what a year 2020 has been. Obviously, we've got about, crisis upon crisis upon crisis coming out of the COVID crisis. Certainly, the Black Lives Matter movement has taken the forefront of media attention. The ongoing focus and awareness of racial injustice is helping to advance this conversation in a way that it never has been before, and we're really happy about that. I actually just saw a study in Fortune that was announced today that 80% of companies feel that they have put issues of racial inequality on the front burner in terms of something that needs to be solved. And so we're glad to see more attention, and now we want to figure out how to translate that attention into progress. At the same time, as many of you know, Fairygodboss is really oriented toward women who are disproportionately bearing the brunt of the COVID kind of fallout, and especially women of color. And we're seeing where women's careers can take long-term hit from the coronavirus pandemic. So this data here, which is data we share a lot from McKinsey, predates the COVID crisis and predates 2020, but what you can see is sort of the persistent issue. And that is that in general, companies have pretty good gender equality and some more diverse racial representation at the entry level, but at each point along the funnel, it becomes less and less and less. Something we've seen also specific to gender diversity is that the tools that are out there, like LinkedIn, aren't converting, aren't helping to fill pipelines with more diverse candidates in the way that we need. And so just using kind of gender and LinkedIn as an example, what Fairygodboss found in our data was that women were significantly less likely to have found their last job on LinkedIn. And what's interesting is that that matched almost identically data that LinkedIn actually released, that where they found that when a woman appeared in recruiter search results, they are 13% less likely to be viewed by a recruiter than a male candidate. So the good news with the great quote is that if you really care about diversity and inclusion, this is your time to shine. You can help be a champion and an advocate and an agent of change for your company, with more momentum, with more investment, with more attention, because this has been brought to the forefront. More and more companies, like these leaders, are making very public commitments to D&I. Some of your companies may have done the same. Some of your companies may have made internal commitments that you're now working to try to figure out how to achieve. Lisa, I'm going to start with the first question for you and ask you to talk a little bit about what you're seeing personally at your company and elsewhere in terms of these commitments.
Sure. Well, just as you've mentioned, many businesses are looking at and reevaluating their diversity strategy and specifically their race and ethnicity agenda. So across RELX, we've enhanced our race and ethnicity agenda as part of our wider diversity strategy. And we've initiated a project, actually a 10-week project, to help us gain better insight into our underrepresented employees and specifically our senior operating manager diverse employees. So for those of you that may not know, there are 4 business divisions at RELX. Each are independent and nearly siloed, but each are also looking at their KPOs based on racial and ethnic goals, focusing on attracting, retaining, and developing diverse, underrepresented talent in each of their organization. And each of the businesses are really striving to make a meaningful change as it relates to representation. Some of the activities that we've done, if I can share, Romy, if I could continue, that's all right?
Yes, please.
We've most recently signed the Business and the Community Race at Work Charter, and the reason I wanted to mention that is that charter requires you to measure your progress towards 5 main principles, and they are leadership, data capture, culture, engaging managers, as well as recruiting and progressing talent. So we see this as setting us up from a long-term perspective relative to our commitment, and specifically how we're going to capture that data and then publicize it. Because at the end of the day, it's all about the accountability, and that's really sort of the crux behind the Business and Community Race at Work Charter. In addition to that, we've made and are continuing to make prominent statements in support of Black Lives Matter, as well as their movement and the social justice towards stemming systemic racism. We found that it's certainly better to be a part of the conversation rather than be on the sidelines. Because if you could just think for a moment, if a promising candidate during an interview ask any of your recruiters, what are you doing relative to racial conscious or raising racial conscious and as well as racial justice, you need to be able to say something there as well as have something tactical behind it. We're also looking at making charitable donations over an extended period of time. And those charitable organizations are known to support anti-racism. And all of this is in harmony across racials. Mission as RELX, mission as it relates to racial justice, and certainly continuing to build our employees' knowledge and skill set, if you will, relative to racial justice and awareness by providing them with a host of materials. And then lastly, as it relates to their ERGs, making sure that they have the support that's necessary by giving all of our employees, in addition to the 2 days that they have for volunteer time, that they now have 2 days for ERG activities. So these are activities that are being supported across RELX. And then, as I said, with the Business in the Community Race at Work Charter, we have a number of metrics, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later, that are in play that are stemming from this project that's underway.
That's fantastic. Lots of really big initiatives in place, and I love how they're trickling down. I actually never heard of a company before that has set aside time for ERG activity. I think that's really ahead of the curve.
I have to say, though, that our ERGs have been critical in sort of setting the pace and the diversity narrative and direction, specifically, most recently, our African Ancestry Network. So they took it upon themselves to meet with the CEOs of each of the businesses and presented proposals, and the CEOs responded relatively quickly. And what I just shared with you were some of the responses and some of the tangible actions. As I said, there's more to come when it comes to the metrics, but certainly we're looking to make some sort of tangible and substantial actions relative to that.
Phenomenal. So I'm excited to talk to you about how all of those actions then translate specifically into hiring and employer branding efforts.
Absolutely.
Do you want to talk a little bit about this?
Sure. So I think everyone knows that when you think about the world right now, that we are in a state of flux. And as it relates to the employer brand or the consumer brand, I think that the emotional connection is a lot more closer now. And that's simply because employees are a lot more vocal relative to what they're supporting, and that has a direct impact, right, on the consumer brand. And so this has become obviously much more apparent during the pandemic as well as the racial justice protests. So as I said before, how companies respond and react during this period can really set them up relative to their brand. If you go dark and stay on the sidelines, and when a candidate or just a lead is inquiring about what are you doing relative to your employee base and the climate, and if you really don't have much to say, that's going to be quite a ding when it comes to your overall attractiveness. So I have to credit Forrester for what you're sharing right now. And so there are 4 questions that they pose to address the company's response. So initially it was to address the company's response to COVID-19, but I have taken a bit of liberty and added the diversity and racial justice climate as a part of that. So the 4 questions which really you should be mindful of regardless of what the crisis is, and that's understanding what candidates and employees want during a pandemic, and as I said before, as well as during the racial justice protest. So that could be whether it's extensive or frequent comms, various wellness and mindfulness activities, which hopefully many of you have experienced with your employer, particularly at the beginning of the pandemic. But now it's about what is your company doing relative to racial justice, is some of the things that I've mentioned before. Even if it's a matter of making sure that your employees are aware of what donations would be matched relative to stemming systemic racism. Second, it's about to understand how you're treating the employees, the candidates, the customers during the crisis. And that's really anchored in safety. So when you think about the pandemic, when you're coming back on campus, what are you doing relative to ensure your employees' safety? We have a number of social media posts that we've done relative to that. We have, for each of the businesses, they also have pages that summarize the various safety precautions that are in play across the organization as well. Third is to gain a better understanding of how remote working is impacting employees and candidates, as well as their experience and particularly their moments that matter. So whether it's no longer being able to go on campus, because clearly not everyone is on campus, perhaps maybe just a few are, but it's how has your culture changed in response to that. We did a video so that we can show prospective candidates what it's like when you start working across any of the RELX businesses remotely. So it's unboxing your computer, the training and the onboarding that was done remotely, and as well as regular sessions with your hiring manager as well, just so they know what to expect. And again, I would say similarly during onboarding, you need to have scripts and messaging as it relates to racial justice. That needs to become a part of your messaging as well. And then lastly, how it affects your team's strategy and culture. So we all know about the importance of employee advocacy. I'm sure many of us probably are still having some pain points as a result of LinkedIn Elevate in its official sense going away, although they're talking about extending some aspects of it. But what I'm getting at here is making sure that your employee advocates are leveraging their meaningful stories, that their stories are reflecting what it is as far as the way of work now in this sort of new environment, if you will, and make sure that they're leveraging their social footprint, that you're providing providing them with a tremendous amount of tremendous amount of content. So these are some of the activities that we have in play now, and mindful that the consumer brand and the employer brand are really so much more closer together from an emotional perspective. Across some of the businesses, we work exceptionally close with marketing, and as well as with all of them, but some are truly strong partners because they too see the importance of making sure that that things are aligned, if you will, when you're talking about your messages. And it's all making sure that you always have a pitch relative to these questions as well.
I love this slide. This is really helpful, and I love this adjustment you've made to it. I think that's so important.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about that employer brand and that EVP. I think probably most people on the call are familiar with the concept, and this definition from Workology is that it's the intersection of what your talent wants and what your company wants. And I have here some examples of EVPs. One is from PwC, and they say specifically, you'll work with people from diverse backgrounds and industries. This one is from Stripe, the payments company, and they said, at Stripe, we welcome diverse perspectives and people. And then this last one, who I will not say who it is, their employer brand is we work hard, throw Nerf darts hard, even harder, and have a whole lot of fun. And you can see how that sounds just tone deaf in this environment. Talk to us about EVP. First of all, just the whole process of establishing EVP, which I know you've been going through recently, and then how diversity work must be core to it.
Yep. So, I mean, just as you said, Romy, that many know what the employer brand is. It's about your reputation, and I believe that your diverse messaging has to be really an integral part of that, certainly as well as your values. So, I think how credible your message is about diversity, how your employer brand ambassadors and your advocates are key at advancing the brand message, especially as it relates across RELX. And it's important for employees, I think, to help companies craft their diversity voice and brand. I think that employees are big drivers of companies' diversity brand. But just to share with you how one particular case study, if you will, as I said before, RELX has 4 business divisions, and 3 of RELX business divisions have gone through an employer value prop exercise, and 2 have approached it similarly, starting with, I'm sure with what everyone's familiar, a discovery phase, leveraging existing data and research, looking at focus groups, in some cases internally and externally, building a message framework, and then creating various imagery that aligns, right, to the message framework. However, one of the businesses, and I just wanted to call this out, leveraged recent results from the Employer Brand Index. So I don't know if you all are familiar with the Employer Brand Index, but it's a product by Link Humus, and they look at up to, I think, 16 different attributes that tell the story behind an employer brand. So those that we know relative to ESG, corporate responsibility, as well as diversity, innovation. I mean, there are hosts of attributes that help develop your story and your employer brand. So what this particular business did is they looked a great deal of the info regarding these attributes, and they looked at various spider diagrams, and that spider diagram helped them see how the various attributes fell across different segments as well as geography. And they also pulled data from a culture and inclusion survey, which gave a view of employees' experience regarding the company's inclusion culture, the overall happiness, the innovation, the productivity. It even gave a peek into the discretionary effort. And all of this was disaggregated by geography. And this additional insight really proved valuable with establishing a targeted message. So rather than looking at, and it's certainly understandable and the right thing to do, but looking at in many instances, a timely and often costly approach, this particular business looked at the data that they had and leveraged, like I said before, the employer brand index and the survey data. I'm sure we all look at survey data, but this particular survey, as I said before, specifically looked at culture and inclusion, happiness, and innovation. So it gave a good view as far as what the culture was, whether it was actual or aspirational. So in addition to that, we certainly encourage our employees, as I said before, to represent our brand. We make sure that the employee advocacy platform serves up a lot of branded content for employees to share. And we look at those employees that have a pretty broad social media footprint so that we could leverage, right, their network as well. But most recently, we're looking now at more employees and looking to leverage our ERGs as it relates to helping to craft a more sort of robust, diverse message, particularly as it relates to race and ethnicity, sort of bearing on the success sort of presentation that the African Ancestry Network had. So, you know, typically, as far as some of the things that we would track for our employer brand, we certainly would be looking at earned media value, and our employee advocacy platform, right? It gives us that data. We look at improvements and lifts to engagement and awareness. We look at our increased followers, as well as increases to applications and influence hires, again, from an employee advocacy perspective. And as I said before, this sort of proves the ROI of the advocacy tool. But again, I don't know if that sort of gets to where you were going, but that sort of is how we have approached employer brand, and most recently what we did in a quick way, frankly, to get to some key messages and timely messages so that we could be more, more responsive and reflective of what's going on in the climate.
Absolutely. And if you don't mind, we'll ask you for a link to the information about the Employer Brand Index to send around afterwards.
Absolutely. And one thing I want to say, I know I mentioned this, I can't say enough about the importance of social media. I'm sure many of you on the call could probably school me about the social media exciting things that you're doing. But the only reason I wanted to comment on it is we all know the rewards and the benefits of programmatic, but not every business has a budget, right, to invest in programmatic and paid media. So I'm just calling this out. It's a great opportunity to keep your leads, your potential candidates warm and engaged with a lot of organic activity. And across RELX, our businesses have been doing a lot with organic. Same thing with the CRM, right? We leverage that, mindful of, not to overtax people to the rest certain audiences. Out the CRM is what we have found is that when we have pushed out a lot of our diversity messages having to do with the diversity days, we recognize or celebrate over 15 diversity days across RELX. So obviously the known International Women's Day, Diversity Awareness Month, but we also look at other diversity days such as International Day for Persons with Disability. First time we celebrated and recognized Juneteenth. And for each of those, we create various templates for employees to participate, to sort of put messages in their own voice. We do provide them with content and hashtags. But typically what we found is when we push out our messages on the CRM, as it relates to diversity, as it relates to some recent appointments having to do with our D&I leaders, it outperforms all other content. And we've been able to get some warm leads as a result of that. So I just wanted to call that out, acknowledging the importance of diversity as you're building your diversity brand. And that's a metric as well over time, because you're sort of keeping people warm and engaged and positively impacting their consideration.
Really good insight. The diversity messaging is resonating. It's converting candidates.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So speaking of messaging, let's talk about content and imagery. And how do you audit and ensure that you're showing you have diverse representation on your career site, in your social media, in content you generate, in advertisements?
So we have been rather intentional now about making sure that I'm not saying that there isn't room for improvement as everyone goes to the various RELX business sites, but we certainly have been more intentional about having our employees of color, as well as mindful of the climate, our employees of African American descent and others, reflected on our various career sites. So we have been doing that regularly. We've been making sure that we've been capturing them from a testimonial perspective, even as it relates to rich media, making sure we're getting their voices on media and video as well. And even as it relates to our supplier diversity, we interviewed our supplier diversity head, had asked her to provide some of the diverse suppliers that she wanted to feature. We did a bit of social media on that. Didn't spend a lot of money, to be honest, but we just wanted to make sure that those that were following us were aware that it clearly is, is top of mind. So those are some of the things that we've been doing rather regularly now. From an internal perspective, we created have found it to be incredibly beneficial. It's a dynamic site as various content is gathered from across RELX as it relates to racial justice, gender equity, pride activities. It's just incredible with the amount of information that we gather. And as I said, it's dynamic because we look to change it pretty regularly. And we will run internal news posts directing employees to that site so they can see how the different businesses are progressing as well. In addition to that, so that they can take various courses, and they're not always our learning courses that are available within our learning and development team, but they're outside of RELX as well, because we want to make sure that our employees have this information at their fingertips, whether it's how to be a better ally, how to ensure that we have inclusive interviewing training, but it's a much more deeper dive into that. I'm sure we're all familiar with psychological safety and courageous conversations. We do that extensively. And we just want to make sure that the host of all this information is available for our employees to see. And as I said, we provide them content to share, and we regularly encourage employees to go there so that if they are asked, what is your company doing relative to a host of areas, when you think about the diversity dimensions, people have an opportunity to see that.
Great. And when you did mention when we were prepping the various geographies that we also need to consider.
Yes, so within the US, right, that's where we have over 90% where we've been able to capture the diversity dimension, the race and ethnicity. And part of the project that I had mentioned sort of early on, this 10-week project, is for us to look at the host of data that we have available across our geography. So we know that we can get that data, that host of data in the US, but particularly in the UK and some other countries in Europe, we are able to capture some ethnicity data. We understand that it's tremendously limited, but by us looking at noun channels that help us engage with BAME, Black, Asian, minority, and ethnic segments outside of the US, we're hoping for us to gain further insight there. But certainly in the US, we have that data. Outside of the US, it's primarily gender. And then, as I said, we're looking at establishing BAME goals in the same way that we're looking at establishing, in addition to gender, race and ethnicity goals. So part of that is looking at how are our senior operating managers that are diverse, looking at various actions that can be taken to increase gender diversity across the different business divisions, because some of them are heavily represented in APAC, versus various regions within Europe. And then, of course, in the US, we're also looking at differentiators relative to employee performance, evaluation, retention, career potential and movement, monitoring diversity across RELX with these variables. And then we're going to look at establishing a diversity baseline, and then look at forecasting a model across RELX for future sort of 5-year scenarios based on where we need to go and how that would influence us setting our goals across the different businesses. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, Romy, relative to geography. We certainly will be establishing goals in the States as we have for gender, for race and ethnicity. But as it relates to outside of the US, we will be looking at how we are performing. The Business and Community Race at Work Charter has a number of platforms that you can use relative to how your diversity across your employee base compares to the diversity in the marketplace, and as it relates to how many of certain diverse audiences are employed, and then how many are employed in certain categories, and then how they're clustered. So we will be consulting all of that when it comes to setting our goals within the US, absolutely, and we're on the journey outside the US. I know that was a bit of around the bend a bit, but hopefully that made sense.
So to that point, let's talk about data and tracking. And so you talked about setting the goals, great. We know, this is stats from LinkedIn, that there's still a real gap in terms of what talent professionals have with regard to data about candidates as they're moving through the funnel. How are you going to monitor progress, particularly within hiring, particularly within recruiting, and at each stage, whether it's screening, whether it's hiring manager interviews, offers, acceptance? How will you track?
Yep, so we will be looking at the, even as from starting with the interview, right? First, full disclosure, we work with an RPO, and the RPO certainly is accountable for providing a diverse slate. So that is something that we will continue to strive toward. We're looking at other, I know I'm not answering your question directly, but just bear with me a moment. We're looking at other channels to augment what the RPO is doing to help ensure that we have a diverse slate as well. So with that, we're ensuring that we have a diverse slate. We're also ensuring that that once we have the diverse slate, that with the enhanced learning and training from inclusive interview with the hiring manager, that they will be more in tune and aware as far as the importance about not just having a diverse slate, but considering the qualified diverse candidate. But from a tracking perspective, we will be establishing a dashboard as well as a waterfall or funnel report where we can see where employees are dropping out and at what stage. So that's something that is nearly done. And upon looking at that dashboard, then that will help us determine as well what our, how successful we are at once they go through the interview process, and how successful we are as far as looking at them in this funnel report. And then in addition to that, we have a host of other reports that will be provided, as I stated before, but it's a matter of how and who will have full access to all of that data when you're talking about the sensitivity about not just the gender, but the race and ethnicity across the variables that I had mentioned before. But certainly we'll be looking at a diverse slate. We'll be, when we're establishing the goals, we'll be looking at what the representation is of the audience in the marketplace, as well as employment, as well as in certain roles, and then how we are comparing to that.
Great. So we are Fairygodboss. So by definition, we are a diverse community, and we're thrilled to have your partnership. But one of the key things that we've observed is it's really essential. If you want more diverse candidates coming in at the top, you have to post in more diverse communities. You can't rely on sort of the catch-alls all the time. And one of the benefits of diverse communities like Fairygodboss and others is that not only are we opening more opportunities to new audiences, but we're also communicating the value prop to those audiences in a way that we believe resonates better. Can you talk to me about your strategy along these lines and how and where you're going to different communities to increase diversity at the top of the funnel?
Sure. So as I said, we work with an RPO, and they certainly are accountable to provide a diverse slate and to look at a host of diverse channels. But we're also looking at suppliers to augment that. So whether it's Fairygodboss, such as you've mentioned, but others such as Mogul, really anyone that at this point that has proven and that also is a over-index with African Americans and Latinos and other diverse audiences. We are encouraging the use of diverse suppliers that have deep networks into these underrepresented audiences. We're also, as I said before, showcasing our employees of color across social and digital media, which goes a long way. We're looking at a variety of events that we hadn't before. Obviously now, majority of them are virtual career fairs, but whether it's HBCUs, even though HBCUs may have, I think I read anywhere to 10 to 15% of people who are of African American descent, but they also have a host of other diverse and underrepresented audiences in their schools as well. So we have been rather vigilant now about participating in HBCU career fairs. Other events having to do with Women Who Tech, Girls That Code, Black Women in Science and Engineering. They host virtual career fairs as well. I think I mentioned Girls Who Code. Women in Engineering outside of the U.S. Can't forget to mention Grace Hopper, right? That's going on right now as we speak, and two of our businesses are participating in that as well. So, and then of course the NSBE, National Society of Black Engineers, Society for Women Engineers. So there are a host of events, but we're just being a lot more intentional about it, even as it relates to meetups. Certainly looking at meetups as opportunities. I understand completely where you're coming from, Romy, about LinkedIn, but we're trying to be a bit more mindful when it comes to the groups within LinkedIn that
those more targeted communities for sure.
Yeah, exactly. That have women groups, associations, as well as those with diverse names, if you will. Another one is fraternities and sororities, particularly the African American fraternities and sororities, which have strong and healthy graduate programs and are very supportive and engaged and do a tremendous amount of community work as well into their older years, if you will. So in addition to, of course, middle age. So we're looking at a host of channels to help augment what our RPO is delivering.
Wonderful. And the last point that you and I discussed in advance is this idea that this investment in diversity may result in an uptick in some key metrics that we're monitoring all the time, right? This is a marathon, not a sprint. We might probably will see a higher cost to acquire a candidate. We'll see a higher cost per hire. We may see a longer time to fill. And we have to have faith and hold on because this is a statistic from McKinsey, but 36% increase in profitability in diverse companies, right? So there's a business reason that we accept more on the front end to deliver more at the end. How do you go about having this conversation internally?
I think, fortunately, the business leaders understand the value and the importance of diversity. Where we continue to struggle with this, as I'm sure with most businesses, is just finding budget. However, I must say with a lot of the discussions that are going on today with the climate, we have seen a freeing up of monies to support that. But prior to, to this scenario, I think what we really look to do is we talked about how diversity is a positive impact to your brand. There are a number of well, just as you shared, but others as it relates to brand, to unearned income when you're talking about brand. And when you're talking with marketing, and if you have marketing as a partner, they really get that and they understand the significance of diversity. When you're able to provide the results of, say, a CRM campaign, or when you can see sort of the business as usual activity versus when you're doing campaigns as it relates to diversity, whether it's International Women's Day or Diversity Awareness Month, you can see significant uplifts in traffic, in followers, in awareness, and engagement. And it takes a while to sort of thread that needle, but when they start to see those metrics, I think it begins to tell the story. I know it's, sometimes it's a bit of a challenge, but when you're doing, even if it's organic, when you're doing social media campaigns, it's really important that have to do with diversity. It's really important as best you can. It's also important to make sure that you're having tracking tags, on pages and things of that nature. Because if you can show the traffic and then show the influenced, the increased applications and then the influenced hires by virtue of whether it's Google Analytics or Adobe and seeing the traffic to certain career site pages and job search pages and things like that, it does slowly but surely open eyes. I think another thing which has helped is awards. If I think of whether it's your awards, the Fairygodboss Awards, or others, that goes a long way. I can recall a CEO of one of the businesses commenting on an award and the attractiveness of a company that got the award and how they did not. So, and then when you talk about how diversity plays a big part in that, it starts to, I think you start to soften the beaches a little bit, and the resistance goes down. But it's not immediate. I would say I can recall, in my past lives, whether at AstraZeneca or at Ericsson, it was a good, year and a half for people to start to see the benefit. And you can see that whether it's, we were looking at percentage representation of women at the time, sort of before and after, and you could see some significant lifts in that. So
great.
Keep at it.
Well, I'm going to wrap up the formal presentation here. We will share it and share the recording. And of course, I encourage everyone to please contact us if you're interested in learning more about Fairygodboss. But I'm going to stop sharing so I can take questions now, because Lisa, as always, you've been so informative and have such, I think, industry-leading structure, data, thinking. So we've all really appreciated it. So let's
thank you very much.
Let me share some of the questions. How should leadership respond to those who don't think we should be talking about social justice in the workplace?
That's a tough one. I would say if you look at data, it shows that you're doing that at your detriment. So, I mean, I guess what I can do, I can go back and find some of those studies and I can send it to you, and then maybe, Romy, send it to you, and then you could share it beyond. But there have been so many studies now for companies who literally have gone dark and not said anything. Like I said, think of a recruiter, right, who has finished up an interview with a pretty skilled candidate, right? Probably at the crux of maybe saying, let's have some subsequent discussions. And you're asked, what are you doing? And if you say, well, we decided to wait and see. We don't want to get it. It's too political, right? We don't want to get involved in that. For the most part, that will not be perceived well. I think I saw a study where over 60% of candidates are asking that. because they want to know if they're fortunate enough to join, what type of culture, how inclusive will it be when they join? So let me find some of those studies, but it's hard to dispute that. It really is. You know, if you want to, I know there's some sensitivity about how you want to commit and to what organizations and things of that nature. But if you literally talk about racial justice, right? If you think about LexisNexis legal, it's all about the rule of law and equity and fair access and all of that.
It's endemic to your brand. It's endemic to
I mean, exactly. Yeah. Think about your corporate responsibility and how critical that is. I encourage you all just to read the Business and Community Race at Work Charter and what businesses and the businesses have committed to. Why would you not want to be associated with that?
Can we share that with the people who attended, Lisa?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. What about, somebody is asking about diversity referral programs. You have thoughts about that?
No. Yeah, you know what, I forgot. I think I forgot to mention that, but within our ERGs, and actually we're having our ERG conference next month, and I'll be talking about ERGs and employee referrals. So what we have attempted to do, now I have to caution you that the first reaction I get is, why should we do that? Isn't that your job? You know, there's enough going on. You're asking us about this, that, and the other. I mean, really, so I was a bit sort of caught off guard with that one. But I think now, particularly some of the ERGs see how influential they can be when it comes to setting, you know, the diversity in the narrative. But okay, so what we have done is what we're doing is looking at our employee referrals that were diverse and asking them to provide us with testimonials. Because at the end of the day, people want to hear and see what other people are saying about the program. In addition to that, we've harmonized it across RELX, because remember, there are 4 businesses independent, just to make the process a lot easier for people to navigate. We've identified hot jobs, again, to make it easy for people when they go there, that they're not going through all of the jobs, that they're just focused on those jobs that are key to the strategic direction, are really hot, right, to the business. But then we want to make sure that our imagery reflect people of color. Because if you're talking about employee referral, you want to reference employees of color in your messaging. As I said, you want to have testimonials from them as well. And what I intend to do at our ERG conference is to talk about how critically important ERGs are at driving our recruitment, our diversity recruitment. So it's about making sure that they know their value, making sure that they know how influential they can be when it comes to that, and then making your employee referral program easy for them to navigate. Again, my consistent statement, I'm not saying there isn't room for improvement on our end, but that's what we're attempting to do.
Great. Somebody else asked, how valuable is a robust mentorship program for internal employees, especially entry-level Black or African-American employees, to help shape their development for growth opportunities?
I personally think it's tremendously valuable. I do know, as part of the project that I had outlined when we were looking at senior operating managers that are diverse across a lot of variables, the geography, as well as how they have been, you know, what their upward mobility pattern has been, what their retention is, and also their access to mentors and senior leaders. So I think that's tremendously valuable. I also want to say that Korn Ferry does have a program where they talk about mentoring for persons of color. And I just want to throw that out there. It's called, I think it's Power of Choice. So they have a couple of programs, but if you wanted to look up Power of Choice by Korn Ferry, it literally talks about how you can help your employees of color navigate their career. And within that, it talks about also mentoring and access to senior leaders. I do know that, Romy, I saw you, were you looking at the clock? Am I over time?
No, you're great. You're great.
I do know that, you know, that's something that there's room for improvement, to be fully transparent on RELX side, and our learning and development team is looking at a more robust, inclusive leadership model, if you will, that will factor in mentors for diverse employees.
Great. I love it. All right, this is the last question, and we'll give everybody a bathroom break before their 4 o'clock, because that's like Zoom life, right? We don't have time for bathroom breaks anymore. But this is for internships. Somebody says they're grappling with the idea of providing scholarships to diverse candidates, but not diverse interns. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I'm not really familiar. I'm not saying I don't have, I'm just not familiar. So if I understand the question, that they're saying they're not sure about giving scholarships to diverse, and maybe if you repeat it, I'll have.
Yeah, so it sounds like they have a program in place where, or they're considering a program where interns get scholarships, interns of diverse backgrounds get scholarships, but there are no equal or similar programs for non-diverse.
I see what you do have to be careful with that. I know that we have, we want to make sure that there's equality in the approach, but at the end of the day, and this is, I think, what the project that I talked about is underway. If you see clear disparities, if you see whether it's when you're talking about retention, and when you're looking at ratings, and I'm not saying that that's apparent at RELX, I'm just saying that we're embarking on that journey. But if you see that, then you need to identify some tangible actions to address that.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of sensitivity in the messaging. It doesn't mean that you don't need to have scholarship programs for non-diverse, but I just think I get it, it's delicate, but if you can clearly see a discrepancy and a lack in movement across certain audiences, then it's something to consider.
Together, the concept and the justification for it.
Yes.
Lisa, as always, I could talk to you all day. I always learn when I talk to you. This has been fascinating. We have gotten so many positive comments and feedback. So this is recorded. Everyone wants to see the slides. Everyone wants to hear the recording. Everyone wants you to share their resources.
Absolutely.
So thank you. Really cannot thank you enough for spending time with us today and sharing your perspective.
And I just want to say I thank you and appreciate so much our partnership, because I've known you for some time now. And this has been great. And everyone see my button here? Go out and vote, right? All right. All right, take care, everyone. Thank you again. I appreciate the time.